He felt the world tilt beneath him as the officer's boot pinned his shoulder into the muddy street, the coarse fabric of his uniform cutting into his skin. All around, indifferent eyes watched as he was stripped of his dignity, hands trembling, shirt stained with the grime of his own fear. The taste of blood mixed with bitter humiliation as he swallowed back his cries, every heartbeat a drum of shame that echoed louder than the policeman's shouted orders. In that moment, the promise of justice lay in tatters, and he wondered if the world would ever see him as more than a silhouette beneath a badge. Watch until the end to see how this incredible story unfolds, and let us know what time you're watching today. The damp morning air lay heavy over Charleston's old harbor, tendrils of fog winding through the pilings like pale ghosts. The salt-flecked wind whispered secrets of tides and time, carrying the distant cry of a lone gull in search of breakfast. Light strained through a ragged sky, splashing muted silver across the water surface. Every plank of the weather-worn dock seemed to remember storms long past, and the soft creak of what underfoot echoed like an old man's sigh. In that somber stillness stood Marcus Thompson, the weight of his past as present as the damp breeze. He leaned against a rusted bollard, arms folded across the dark wool of his coat, surveying the murky horizon. At 32, Marcus carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen more in a few years than most saw in a lifetime. Special operations missions, nights spent beneath enemy fire, and mornings wrestling with the ghosts of choices made in the fog of war. Now, on leave from the Navy, he fought a different kind of battle, a struggle for peace in a body and mind still honed for conflict. He closed his eyes and inhaled, tasting the sharp promise of rain. Even here, miles from the nearest base, guilt clung to him like salt on skin. The photograph in his coat pocket pressed against his chest. A smiling little boy, curly hair windswept, eyes shining with trust. Marcus forced his mind away from that face, focusing instead on the rhythmic slap of waves against pilings. He'd promised to be better, for his son, for himself. Yet every memory of the missions he'd led felt like a life lived by someone else. A distant motor growled along the quay. Marcus's eyes snapped open, scanning the fog for movement. A Ford pickup emerged, headlights dull in the mist. The driver's window rolled down, and a man stepped out, tall, with a lean build and the crisp posture of someone used to authority. His uniform was dark blue, badge gleaming on his chest. Police Officer John Miller. Miller's boots hit the dock with a soft thud. He approached Marcus with a measured gait, eyes hidden behind aviator shades, even in the gray dawn. Marcus straightened, tilting his cap back to reveal close-cropped hair. They regarded each other in silence, two men shaped by discipline but divided by different codes. "Morning, Mr. Thompson," Miller said, voice low but firm, carrying the finality of a verdict yet to be delivered. He cleared his throat. "You're here early." "Just checking on some," Marcus began, but Miller cut him off with a polite nod. "I know why you're here," Miller said. "The security team's report came through. You're scheduled to meet Commander Hayes at 10. They want you prepped for that joint task briefing." Marcus hesitated, the words rattling through him like pebbles in a tin can. I thought leave started next week." Miller's expression didn't soften. "Changed. You're needed now." A line of tension ran along Marcus's jaw. He glanced at the harbor, at the ribbed metal of a naval patrol boat rocking in its berth. Each ripple seemed to whisper warnings, echoes of a past he fought to leave behind. He exhaled, lungs empty of the promise of peace. "I'll be there," he said finally, in a voice he barely recognized as his own. Miller nodded once, then turned to the pickup. Before sliding in, he paused over his shoulder. "One more thing, Mr. Thompson. Keep it quiet. They don't want surprises." Marcus watched Miller disappear into the mist, headlights fading. He stood alone again, the gull's cry replaced by a deeper silence. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Marcus squared his shoulders and tucked the photograph back into his pocket. The harbor was cold, but his back stayed straight. He wouldn't let fear define him. A soft splash sounded behind him. Turning, Marcus saw the patrol boat's captain, a lean woman with sandy hair tied in a tight bun, Captain Rebecca Sanderson. Her uniform bore the same sharp creases as Miller's, but her eyes were warmer, curious. "Marcus," she called, voice carrying easily. "Thought I'd find you here." He offered a faint smile. "You know me too well, Captain." She stepped onto the dock, boots skimming droplets as she approached. "Ido. Listen, I heard about the briefing. They want you front and center." He nodded. "I know." His gaze drifted back to the fog-shrouded water. "Feels like I never left." Rebecca studied him for a heartbeat, then asked, "Are you ready for that?" Marcus looked at her, the question echoing inside him. He was used to readiness in the field, gripping a rifle, clearing a room. But readiness for what came next? The apology to his son? The reckoning with the man he'd become? He straightened and set his jaw. "I'm ready," he said. Rebecca offered a brief, encouraging nod, then turned to lead the way toward the base entrance, where high-powered lights cut through the fog like beacons of scrutiny. Marcus followed, each step measured, his boots clicking on the concrete. Inside the locked gates, the world transformed. Harsh fluorescent bulbs lit the path, and the low hum of generators seemed to pulse beneath the ground. Security cameras pivoted, tracking his movement. Men and women in crisp uniforms rushed by, voices clipped with urgency. The scent of coffee and paper filled the air, punctuated by the faint tang of engine oil. Marcus paused at a bulletin board crowded with notices, orders, bulletins, mission updates. One poster stood out, a photograph of a rugged coastline, captioned Operation Sentinel, Deployment Schedule. Next to it, pinned at a jaunty angle, was a memo, Mandatory Participatory Briefing, May 12, 2025, 1,000 hours. Marcus's throat tightened at the date. Today's date, May 30th, 2025, he reminded himself. The shift, they'd moved it sooner. Something was stirring. Rebecca caught his hesitation. "Don't read too much into it," she murmured, but he could see her concern. "I'll see you in the conference room." He managed a steady nod as she slipped away into the throng. Alone again, he stood for a moment longer, then turned and made his way to a heavy steel, door-marked briefing room. Two guards in tactical gear stood on either side, expressionless behind mirrored visors. Marcus showed his credentials. The guards acknowledged him with a nod and stepped aside, like statues coming to life for a single purpose. Inside, the room was a world apart. Sleek tables arranged in a U-shape, screens lining the walls, a single podium at the head. The glossy floor reflected harsh lights overhead. At the center of the U sat Commander Daniel Hayes, salt and pepper hair cropped close, eyes sharp as flint. Around him were half a dozen officers, faces unfamiliar but bearing the same rigid calm Marcus had worn for years. Marcus took a seat near the front, sliding into the chair with the easy grace of habit. His eyes moved across his new colleagues. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, tapping a pen against her notepad. Major Luis Ramirez, arms crossed, brows knit, and a young intelligence analyst, Olivia Parker, whose gaze darted between her laptop screen and the door. Then his eyes found the last man to enter, a lanky figure in plain clothes, badge clipped to his belt, Detective John Miller. A cold knot formed in Marcus's stomach. Miller offered a curt nod as he passed, then settled in the corner. Marcus's pulse picked up. He remembered that badge, remembered the way Miller's eyes had followed him on the dock. He didn't trust Miller, and for reasons he couldn't name yet, he didn't like him. Commander Hayes tapped the podium. "Mr. Thompson," he began, voice calm, authoritative, "thank you for arriving on such short notice. We have a situation developing, an incident that requires both military precision and cooperation with local law enforcement." Marcus straightened, hands flat on the table. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder now, as if the very air waited for the next words. "Earlier this week," Hayes continued, "a civilian has come forward with allegations against one of our operators. The claim involves excessive force near the waterfront pier last Tuesday evening." He paused, letting the words settle. "We need to understand exactly what happened. Mr. Thompson, as one of our most experienced SEALs, I'm assigning you to lead our internal fact-finding mission." A murmur rippled through the room. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze. Inside, his mind raced. He'd been there, part of the perimeter team. He'd seen chaos, but no civilians were harmed. He could swear to it. Commander Hayes locked eyes with him. "I need your report by 1800 hours today. You'll coordinate with Detective Miller here." He nodded toward the seated officer. "You two will work together. Civilian authorities are involved now. We cannot contain this within military channels." Marcus's throat tightened. Detective Miller, already blinking into his mind like an unwelcome reminder. He met Miller's eyes. The detective's stare was cool, assessing. "No welcome there." "Yes, sir," Marcus said. His voice sounded hollow in the silent room. Hayes tapped a button on the podium. The screens flickered to life, displaying grainy footage from a handheld camera. A dark figure stumbling backward, arms flailing, then slamming hard into concrete. The clip cut to Marcus's silhouette, standing over the figure, pistol drawn, finger on the trigger. His heart thundered. He watched himself hesitate for a split second before holstering his weapon. He moved to the drowned man, crouching to help. Detective Miller's voice crackled through the speakers. "That footage doesn't show the beginning," he said. "We have more." The image shifted, another camera angle. Shadows moved like wraiths. A civilian stumble. Was that a shove? The screen went dark. In that charged moment, Marcus realized the larger conflict had begun. His name, his creed, his very identity were on the line. He swallowed, gripping the edge of the table. Outside, the mist still clung to the harbor, oblivious to the storm building within walls of steel and screens. He gave a slow nod. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The dock behind him, the harbor before him. And now this room, all part of a single truth he had to uncover. And beneath it all, the fragile promise of peace he carried for his son. It depended on what he would do in the next 4 hours. Marcus drove away from the base, the morning's briefing still heavy in his mind. The sky had cleared a little, but the air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. He steered his rental sedan onto Charleston's winding streets, eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. Every shadow seemed too deep, every passing car a silent watcher. His phone buzzed, Rebecca checking in, no doubt, but he silenced it. He needed time to think. He turned onto an old road that hugged the river's edge, the kind of place he'd walked with his son before bedtime. He hadn't seen that little boy in a week, and guilt gnawed at him. Duty pulled him here, fatherhood pulled him home. He wove through the oak trees dripping with Spanish moss, the road narrowing until he reached the forgotten dock where he'd first met Miller. He parked under a leaning lantern post, its glass cracked, flickering with the last of its battery. The boat bobbed beside the pier, draped in early sunlight. Marcus climbed out, boots crunching on gravel. He breathed deep, tasting the mix of brine and earth. The harbor usually soothed him. Today it felt like an open wound. He approached the rusted bollard where he'd first leaned against the morning he'd been summoned. Only this time, a folded sheet of paper fluttered at its base. Marcus frowned. The wind was too calm to send anything skittering. He bent to pick it up, a child's drawing, roughly torn from a sheet, edges jagged. He recognized the scrawl at once, his son's handwriting wobbly and uneven. In bright crayon, a stick figure man in uniform stood beside a smaller figure holding a red balloon. The sky, colored in angry reds and purples, arched above them. Below, in block letters, someone had written, "Why did you lie?" His heart pounded so hard he thought he might hear it in his ears. He touched the drawing, fingers trembling. It felt warm, as if it had just been pressed into his hand. Who the hell would? His breath caught. He spun around, scanning the pier. No footprints beyond his own. No car idling down the road. Just the quiet water lapping against posts. The docks would creak as a stray breeze leaned over the river. He gripped the drawing tighter, the crayon furrowed where someone had pressed hard. His phone buzzed again. He glanced down, unknown number. A text. Check the files. No name. No timestamp. Marcus's jaw clenched. Check the files? Which files? The briefing? The footage? His mind raced back to the meeting room. Miller's clipped warning, "Keep it quiet." They don't want surprises. Had Miller sent this? Or someone higher up? Was it a warning or a threat? He shoved the drawing into his coat and got back into the car. Hands shaking, he started the engine. He needed answers, but where to start? His instincts told him to drive back to the base, confront Hayes, and demand every piece of evidence. But who knew how much had already been buried? Who had the power to twist the truth? The car rattled over the bridge spanning the Ashley River. Below, fishermen cast lines into glassy water. A pelican drifted on the current. Outside looked peaceful, too peaceful. Marcus's breath steadied as he approached the base gates. He flashed his credentials to the guard, eyes darting for any sign of recognition. The guard nodded, but his expression was blank. Nothing had changed, yet everything had changed. Inside, the hum of activity felt oppressive. He walked past the same bulletin board, still pinned to May 12th's briefing notice, and forced himself forward to the operations office. Lieutenant Chen's nameplate gleamed on the door. He knocked once, then slid inside. Sarah Chen looked up from her desk, eyebrows raised. "Marcus, everything okay?" She gestured to the visitor's chair. He closed the door behind him and Saturday, "I found something." He drew the crumpled drawing from his pocket. Her eyes widened. She took it gingerly, studying the crude drawing and the ominous message beneath. This is your son's handwriting," she said. "Did you bring him here?" Her voice shook slightly. "No," Marcus said, "and I've been off duty. He's with my sister." He rubbed his face. "Someone's messing with me, Sarah." She tapped her pen against the desk. "We've been so focused on the civilian complaint, I didn't think someone would target you personally." He nodded. "I think it's connected. Last night I got a text. Check the files." He saw her color. "Which files?" "The footage, the interviews, all of it." She leaned back, glancing toward her computer. "You know, there's something odd. I was looking at your digital folder. It's locked. I can't even open it." She frowned. "Files labeled restricted, Thompson. And I've been here since 8 this morning. I never noticed before." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Who set that up?" Sarah shook her head. "Not me. Hayes? Miller? I don't know." She slid the drawing back. "Whatever it is, it's bigger than the accusation." He stood. "Thanks, Sarah. Keep this between us." He tucked the paper away. "I'm going to see Hayes." She nodded uncertainty. "Be careful." Marcus left, each footstep echoing down the corridor. He reached the elevator, tapping the call button. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh. Inside, he inhaled, bracing himself. He rode to the second floor, where Commander Hayes's office waited at the end of the hallway. The plaque on the door read, "Daniel Hayes, Joint Operations." He raised his fist to knock and paused. He remembered how Hayes had locked eyes with him in the briefing. No warmth, only duty. And now, a restricted file. A hidden drawer in the deck of cards. He took a breath and knocked 3 times. "Sir, it's Thompson." "Come in," Hayes's voice said, crisp, controlled. Marcus stepped inside. The office was spacious, dark wood panels, leather chairs, a single window overlooking the base. Hayes sat behind his desk, hands folded, expression unreadable. "Marshal," Hayes said, using the rank Marcus had left behind, "I just received word about an incident at your residence." Marcus's heart slammed. "What?" "Security cameras early this morning," Hayes said. "Unidentified person approached your home. No break-in, but someone tampered with the door lock. You weren't there." Marcus's stomach nodded. His reserve had posted his leave address. "The house near Sullivan's Island, empty this week." "My son, was he in danger?" "There's no sign anyone got inside," Hayes said. "But sir, that drawing, it's not just a creepy message. It's a warning. Someone wants you off balance." Marcus swallowed. "Then show me the files. Everything." Hayes's gaze sharpened. "I want you focused on the civilian complaint. We cannot afford distractions." "That's my family you're talking about," Marcus said quietly. "My son." Hayes leaned back. "And I'm protecting that as well, Thompson. But orders stand. You and Miller need to find out what really happened on that pier. You have 4 hours to compile data, interview witnesses, and cross-reference logs. Then you come back here." Marcus nodded slowly. He sensed the edge in Hayes's words, as if the commander was warned. He pushed through the double doors into the stairwell, taking 2 steps at a time. At the ground floor, he burst out leaning against the wall, gasping. His phone buzzed again, unknown number. He didn't look. Not now. He needed to reach Miller. He needed to see what the detective had uncovered. If Miller had more footage, if he was setting Marcus up, or if he was helping him expose the truth. Marcus's trust warred with his instincts, every fiber of his being told him to watch Miller carefully. He climbed into his car and dialed Miller's direct line. It rang twice, then clicked. "Thompson," Miller's gravelly voice said. "Detective," Marcus replied, voice steady. "We need meat. Now." "On my way," Miller said. Marcus exhaled. At least he wasn't alone in this. He watched the base gate recede in his mirrors, then steered toward the old courthouse downtown. If files were locked at the base, maybe civil records held the key. He would find every piece of footage, every witness statement. And someone was going to explain why his son had been dragged into this. As he drove, the harbor slipped from view, replaced by brick buildings and iron railings. The sun climbed higher, slicing through the shadows of the city. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He promised himself he would protect his son. He would uncover the truth. And if someone betrayed him, he would expose them. Because he was trained to face threats, whether on a foreign shore or at his own home. And now, the greatest threat was hiding in plain sight. His next move would decide everything. Marcus's sedan rolled to a stop outside the old county courthouse, red bricks warming in the rising sun. He slid out and looked up at the columns, their stone faces weathered by centuries of judgment. Detective John Miller emerged from the courthouse door, badge glinting at his hip, expression unreadable, but eyes curious. "Lieutenant Chun told me you might come here," Miller said, voice low as he approached. He held a manila envelope. "Found some CCTV from a nearby deli. Might show more of what happened on the pier." Marcus took the envelope and glanced inside. Sheets of still frames, dozens of grainy images, people milling on the dock, Miller's patrol car idling, the flash of Marcus's silhouette. But in one frame, a gloved hand shoved a civilian into the water. The angle was odd, off to the side. The shove looked intentional. He zoomed in with his phone's editing tool. The hand was too large to be the civilian's. "Who's that?" Marcus muttered. Miller watched. "We don't know yet. Could be someone else on the pier." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I thought I was on the perimeter. I never saw another person." Miller's lips twitched, as if fighting a smile. "Maybe you were focused on your team. You trained to scan threats, not your own." Marcus gripped the envelope. "Or someone's covering tracks." Miller nodded. "Let's see what else we have." They entered the courthouse's small, dusty records room. The air smelled of old files and coffee. A clerk led them to a terminal. Miller handed over a request card. Within minutes, they pulled up dock maintenance logs, visitor sign-in sheets for the night shift, and security patrol reports. "Look here," Miller said, pointing at a spreadsheet of sign-ins. A Michael Anderson signed in at 7:45 p.m., 20 minutes before the incident. But there's no record of him signing out. Marcus leaned forward. He recognized the name. Anderson was the civilian who'd filed the complaint. "He was supposed to be our witness," he said. "He said he watched the whole thing." Miller frowned. "But if he didn't leave, who did the shoving?" Marcus scanned the maintenance logs. "There's a late entry, security breach, no specifics. And it's called H." He tapped his finger. "Hayes." Miller's eyes flicked up. "Commander Hayes doesn't do maintenance logs." Marcus shook his head. "Someone's forging initials." Miller opened his notebook. "We'll need to talk to Anderson. He's due for another interview." Marcus nodded. "Then we'll see if he'll talk." That afternoon, they met Michael Anderson at a windowless conference room in the precinct. Anderson sat nervous, hands twisted in his lap. He wore a threadbare jacket and shifting eyes that darted to the door every time it opened. Lieutenant Sarah Chun and analyst Olivia Parker were already there. Chen's arms were crossed. Parker tapped keys on her laptop, eyes darting between monitor and witness. "Mr. Anderson," Sarah began, voice polite but firm. "We'd like to clarify the events on the pier last Tuesday." Anderson swallowed. I told you everything I saw." Miller slid the deli footage stills across the table. "Are you sure?" Anderson's gaze fixed on the images of the shove. Adam's apple bobbed. "Yeah, I saw it." Marcus leaned forward. "Then explain this. You never left the dock, so who shoved you?" Anderson stared back, lips pressed. I don't know." Olivia spoke up, voice calm. "Your statement said you left at 8:15. Yet the visitor log shows no departure. Why the discrepancy?" Anderson's eyes welled. I'm scared. I didn't want," he trailed off. Sarah's tone softened. "We need the truth, Michael. If you're protecting someone, you're helping them get away with violence." He looked at Marcus, at the face that flickered through documentary film, pistol holstered, concerned in his stance, and his shoulders sagged. "I was paid to lie." Silence. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Betrayal tasted bitter. "Paid," he echoed. Anderson glanced at Miller, as if seeking permission to speak. Miller inclined his head. "There's a man named Richards," Anderson said. "He owns a seafood truck by the pier. He hired me to act the part. Said it'd be for an insurance claim." Marcus started. "Richards, a local vendor known for skirting regulations. Why use me?" Anderson shook his head. He didn't care who took the fall. Said the military would hush it up. Sarah slapped her notebook shut. "So, we need to find Richards." Miller stood. "Got a description?" Anderson nodded. Beard, greasy hair, always chewing gum. Marcus exhaled. "Let's move." They split up. Marcus and Sarah drove toward the market stalls by the waterfront. Miller and Olivia headed to the dock's back alleys to track down Richards's truck. As they turned onto King Street, Marcus glanced at Sarah. He'd admired her precision back at base, her calm under fire. But now, face to face with this chaos, she looked uncertain. "You okay?" he asked. She pressed her lips in a thin line. "I underestimated how deep this went." He nodded. "It's not just about me." She inhaled. "My brother is a Marine. If someone framed him," she trailed off, eyes distant. Marcus's heart squeezed. "You're worried, too?" She met his gaze. "If this is a setup, it could ruin lives." He offered a steady smile. "We'll stop that from happening." She looked at him, appreciation softening her features. Meanwhile, at the edge of the docks, Miller and Olivia found the seafood truck. It sat beneath a sagging awning, vibrant signs peeling. Miller knocked on the battered door. A heavy-set man in stained overalls appeared, gummy teeth glinting as he bit the end of a straw. He narrowed his eyes. "I'm Detective Miller," Miller said, flashing his badge. "You're Leon Richards?" The man spat. "That's what they're calling me these days." Miller held up the deli photos. "Did you hire a man to lie about a shove?" Richards shrugged. "Might-a happened." Olivia stepped forward. "You paid Anderson?" Richards's lips curled. "Business is business." Miller's voice hardened. "You're under investigation for conspiracy and obstruction of justice." Richards laughed, a low rumble. "You don't scare me, cop." Miller's hand went to his holster. Richards lunged forward, flinging the door open behind him. He bolted into the alleys. Olivia gasped. Miller took off in pursuit, feet pounding. The alley curved, Miller rounded a corner, and Richards was gone. No sign of footprints, no echoes. Breathing hard, Miller returned to the truck. Olivia waited. "He's fast." Miller shook his head. "Or he had help." Olivia frowned. Someone tipped him off. Miller looked at the open door of the truck. Maybe someone at the base. At the fish market, Marcus and Sarah reconvened, evidence in hand. Richards's truck, Anderson's confession. They compared notes. "We were onto something," Sarah said, frustration evident. Marcus folded his arms. Richards ran. "He knew we were coming." Sarah nodded. "And someone warned him." He stared at her. "Who would have access to our plan?" She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "You told me you were going to the market." He felt a pulse of irritation. "Just you and me." Her eyes met his. "And now it seems that wasn't so private." He exhaled. "We need to assume everything is compromised." Sarah closed her eyes, then opened them. "Including Miller?" Marcus hesitated. I trust Miller, mostly. She studied him. He found those files. He's involved deeper than you know. Sarah's lips pressed in agreement. We'll meet Miller at the precinct quietly. See what he's discovered. That evening, they returned to the precinct under the guise of filing reports. Marcus sat across from Miller's desk in the crime lab, lit by fluorescent glare. Sarah hovered behind him. Olivia paced. Miller closed his laptop. I found their phone records. He slid a printout across the desk. Richards's burner phone pinged off a cell tower near your house this morning. Marcus's heart sank. Near my home. Miller nodded. And the number that texted you, check the files, traces back to that same phone. Marcus started. He was here. Miller inhaled. Someone used Richards to spook you, send you back to base, then lured Richards here. Sarah gasped. So they control both ends. Miller's gaze turned to Marcus. You ready to know who? Marcus leaned forward. Yes. Miller took a breath. The burner phone record is linked to an office at Joint Ops, Commander Hayes' office. Silence. Marcus's mind spun. Hayes warning him, Hayes blocking file access, Hayes now a suspect. Sarah's hand found his arm. What will you do? Marcus closed his eyes. I'll ask Hayes directly, and I'll record it. Miller nodded. I'll back you up. Olivia exhaled. Then we'll have our answers. Marcus stood. Tomorrow at first light. As he left the lab, Sarah at his side, he glanced at Miller. Trust wavered, but purpose steadied his resolve. The hidden motives were coming into focus. Betrayal at the top, manipulation cutting deep. Yet he found strength in allies, Sarah's loyalty, Olivia's clarity, even Miller's uneasy honesty. Night settled over Charleston. Within the precinct's walls, the game had changed. Marcus knew the next move could bring salvation or ruin. But whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on, determined to uncover the truth and protect those he loved. And in that promise, he found a flicker of hope in the gathering shadows. Marcus slipped through the late-night fog that clung to Charleston streets, helmet light dancing off moist cobblestones. He had agreed to meet Detective Miller in an old warehouse by the river, a place Miller claimed held the answers everyone was hiding. Sarah and Olivia waited behind him, their quiet resolve matching his own. Marcus's pulse throbbed in his temples. Tonight, everything would change. The warehouse loomed silent, its tall windows darkened by decades of neglect. The broken door swung wide on rusted hinges, revealing a cavernous interior littered with broken pallets and torn tarps. Miller stood beneath a single overhead lamp, his badge catching the glow, eyes narrowed. Thanks for coming, Miller said. His voice was low, almost weary. I figured you'd want to hear this in person. Marcus nodded. He studied Miller's face. Fatigue and something else, guilt, etched fine lines at the detective's temples. Let's hear it. Miller reached into his coat and pulled out a slim manila folder. He handed it to Marcus, who opened it in a nearby crate. Inside were dozens of photographs, screenshots, and a single sheet of typed text. An internal memo stamped confidential. What is this? Marcus whispered. Miller lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. I dug through the Joint Ops archives, found something buried under years of files. Marcus scrutinized the photos. Blurry images of a second camera pointed toward the pier the night of the incident, taken from a service ladder beneath the boardwalk. He flipped through more, shot after shot of Marcus's team moving into position, except one frame showed something impossible. Detective Miller himself, in civilian clothes, perched on that ladder, filming. He looked up at Miller. You were there. Miller crushed his cigarette underfoot. Not just there. I orchestrated it. Marcus's chest constricted. What are you saying? Miller's voice rasped. You think I helped you, kept you in the loop? I was the one who tipped off Richards, sent the drawing to your son's doc, blocked your file access. All of it, so you'd come here, so I could get you alone. Sarah gasped. Olivia stepped back, hand to her mouth. No, Marcus Crockett, you're working with Hayes. Miller shook his head. Hayes knew nothing. I set him up as much as I set you up. Commander Hayes, good man, clean record, but he's too naive for this game. Marcus's mind reeled. Every step he and Miller had taken, every revelation had been funneled through this detective's agenda. Why? To frame me? Miller flicked ashes onto the concrete floor. I wanted to expose you, Thompson, force you to admit what you did on that pier. What did I do? Marcus's voice cracked. I helped a man who fell. I never used excessive force. Miller's eyes burned. You shot first and asked questions later. You crossed a line, maybe not legally, but morally. He opened the typed memo. Read this. Marcus's eyes scanned the text. Subject: after-action discrepancies. It has come to our attention that SEAL Team 4's perimeter protocols on May 12, 2025, deviated from standard engagement rules. Multiple eyewitness accounts and unlogged surveillance indicate unauthorized use of force. Recommendation: internal review of lead officers, including Commander Hayes' oversight and Lieutenant Thompson's conduct. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. This is selective editing. Miller's lips curled. The real content? It named me as the only witness to the shove. It said, I saw you push the civilian with deadly intent, then cover it up. It called for my testimony, but they buried it. He closed the folder. They didn't want truth. They wanted control. So you're the whistleblower, Marcus said, voice hollow. But instead of reporting it, you set up a sensational scandal. Miller sighed. I tried going through channels. I wrote letters. I filed memos with internal affairs. They disappeared. You know how powerful a decorated SEAL is? You can bend the system to your will. Marcus stared at him. And you thought framing me would fix it? Miller shrugged. I thought I could scare you into confessing. I thought you'd realize the only way out was truth. But you kept fighting every lead, so I had up the stakes. He flicked his cigarette, but aside. I'm sorry for dragging Sarah and Olivia into this. Marcus swallowed. His gaze flicked to Sarah, confusion and hurt in her eyes. Olivia's face was pale. Why them? Miller shook his head. Collateral damage. I didn't want anyone else hurt. I wanted only you to stand before the truth. The warehouse felt impossibly still. Marcus realized the truth was more complex than abuse of power. It was betrayal by the one man he had come to trust. He straightened, forcing his heart rate down. What do you want now, John? Miller's jaw tightened. I want this fixed. I want the Real memo released, witnesses found, procedures corrected. He met Marcus's eye. And I need you, not in the SEALs, but as an ally. Marcus exhaled. His mind raced. Could he trust Miller now? How? Miller exhaled a shaky breath. You and I go to internal affairs together. Present the evidence. Show them I'm not some rogue cop. I'm the only honest one left. Marcus closed the folder. The betrayal still stung, but beneath it, a grudging respect. Miller had risked everything to surf the truth, even if his methods cross lines. All right, but we do it my way. Transparent. No more lies. Miller nodded, relief washing over his features. Agreed. Sarah stepped forward, voice trembling. What about me? Olivia? Miller looked at each in turn. I'll explain to both. Tell them why I lied. He met Sarah's gaze. You're a good officer, Sarah. I'm sorry I made you doubt me. She nodded, but her eyes were cold. You caused a lot of damage. Miller's shoulders slumped. I know. Marcus straightened. We leave at dawn. We go to internal affairs. We expose everything. The memo, the recordings, the witnesses, and we clear your name and mine. Miller lifted his chin. Lead the way, Lieutenant. Marcus studied him in the dim light. The man who had betrayed him was now offering an uneasy partnership. In that moment, Marcus saw the cost of half-truths and secrets and the perilous path ahead. He tucked the folder into his coat, clipped the detective's badge to his own belt. Outside, the first bird calls of dawn drifted through broken windows. The rising sun would bring reckoning, and in its light, truth or ruin would be laid bare. The warehouse door creaked shut behind them as they stepped into a new day, bound by fractured trust, but driven by a shared pursuit of justice. And in the hush of morning, Marcus knew the real conflict was only beginning. The first light of dawn painted a pale wash across Charleston's waterfront as Marcus Thompson eased his sedan onto the empty street. Now, every passing street lamp cast long shadows that felt full of accusation. "You sure you've got everything?" he asked Miller, voice low. Miller opened his eyes and nodded. "The memo, the footage, witness statements. My recordings from the warehouse. They'll all be on the table." "Good." Marcus exhaled. "Because once we walk into that building, there's no going back." Sarah turned, gaze clear. "We stick together. No surprises." Olivia closed her laptop. "I've synced our files to the secure drive. If anything happens, at least someone will have the truth." Marcus allowed himself a small nod. He trusted Olivia's meticulous care. But even as the sedan wound toward the austere brick of the Internal Affairs building, the knot in his chest tightened. He thought of his son at home, too young to understand grown-up politics but smart enough to notice a lie. They arrived without fanfare, no flashing lights, no guard at the door. Marcus parked in the lot and killed the engine. The interior fell silent, but for their breaths and the distant squawk of a gull. He slid out and shut his door deliberately, the click echoing down the row. Inside, the lobby's fluorescent glare revealed polished floors and a single receptionist behind smoke glass. Detective Miller produced his badge and motioned through, Marcus close behind. Sarah fell beside him, while Olivia lingered briefly to upload the final file. They rode the elevator to the third floor in uneasy silence. When the doors opened, a single hallway stretched before them, white walls bare except for a list of door numbers and a stenciled arrow, investigation unit. In the outer office, two agents sat behind a long desk reviewing documents, their pens scratched in unison. Marcus approached, Miller at his side. "I'm Detective John Miller," Miller said crisply, sliding his credentials forward. "This is Lieutenant Marcus Thompson. He's here to present evidence regarding an incident on May 12, 2025. The agents exchanged polite nods. "Mr. Thompson, Detective Miller," the nearer one said. "Follow us. We've prepared a conference room." The narrow corridor bent left, then right, doubling back. At the end, a frosted glass door marked Conference Room 3A. Inside, a heavy table waited, ringed by black chairs. At the head sat a single man, tall, wiry, sharp-featured, dark suit immaculate. Agent Robert Hayes, not the commander, but the IA officer. Marcus recognized the name from the files. "Lieutenant Thompson," Hayes said, voice smooth. "Please have a seat." His gaze flicked to Miller, then to Sarah and Olivia behind Marcus. "I see you've brought colleagues." Marcus slid into the chair. Miller took the next, Sarah and Olivia on either side. Hayes leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. "You understand the gravity of an internal affairs review. Allegations of excessive force against a civilian carry serious consequences, not just administrative, but potential criminal charges." Marcus held his gaze. "I understand." Hayes opened a leather binder. "Detective Miller has provided preliminary testimony. I've also reviewed the footage you submitted and the warehouse recordings. But before we proceed, I need to confirm. Were you, Lieutenant Thompson, present at the pier on the evening in question?" Marcus lifted his chin. "Yes, I was part of the perimeter team." Hayes's pen hovered. "Were you aware that someone reportedly shoved the civilian, Michael Anderson, into the water? That he alleges the shove was intentional and unprovoked?" Marcus drew in a breath. "I saw him fall. He tripped. I moved to help. I did not shove him." Hayes nodded serenely. "Very well. We'll begin by hearing Detective Miller's full account." He looked at Miller. "Go ahead." Miller cleared his throat. His voice wavered only briefly as he recounted finding the second camera, discovering the memo, staging the warehouse confrontation. As he spoke, Marcus watched Hayes's inscrutable expression. The agent's eyes flickered between Miller and Marcus as if measuring their words for hidden undertones. When Miller finished, Hayes tapped his pen. "Thank you, Detective. Now, Lieutenant Thompson, you have evidence you'd like to present?" Marcus pushed the manila folder across the table. "This is the unaltered memo from Joint Ops, marked restricted. It names Miller as a witness to a possible misuse of force. It calls for an oversight review of my conduct and Commander Hayes' supervision. Agent Hayes unfolded the memo. He examined it briefly before glancing up. This contradicts the official record, which states no such memo exists. His tone held no accusation, only cold curiosity. Marcus's heart rattled against his ribs. They buried it. Hayes's lips curved gently. Who did? Miller's eyes darkened. I did, because no one else would. Hayes's gaze shifted to Sarah. Lieutenant Chun, you accompanied Lieutenant Thompson and Detective Miller in gathering witness testimony and video evidence. Any concerns? Sarah swallowed, then spoke with crisp clarity. Yes, I believe my commanding officer, Commander Daniel Hayes, was unaware of this memo. I suspect someone manipulated the chain of command. Agent Hayes raised an eyebrow. Manipulation within joint ops? Olivia offered her file. I have the CCTV stills from the deli, the visitor logs showing Michael Anderson's presence beyond his alleged departure time, and phone records linking Richards's burner to the base and to Lieutenant Thompson's home. Hayes took each item, scanning them with careful attention. He stood, moving to the whiteboard at the room's end. With a black marker, he sketched a timeline. Pier incident, civilian complaint, memo creation, missing files, warehouse meetup, dawn trip here. When he finished, he turned back, marker in hand. Your evidence presents a compelling case of systemic manipulation. But I must abide by protocol. I need corroboration. Where will we find that? Marcus asked quietly. Hayes tapped the board. We'll summon Commander Daniel Hayes for testimony. We'll cross-check server logs from Joint Ops. And we'll re-interview Michael Anderson under oath. A cold bead of sweat slid down Marcus's spine. You'll need Michael's cooperation. Hayes nodded. We'll also want to speak with Leon Richards, though he is absent himself after your interview. Silence filled the room as Marcus contemplated what Hayes described. To prove the conspiracy, they dragged Commander Hayes into the investigation, exposing him to ruin. And Michael Anderson, a frightened civilian, would be further endangered. His son's drawing, meant as a threat, might be replayed in court. Miller cleared his throat. Lieutenant Thompson, you still intend to go public with this? Marcus closed his eyes briefly, recalling his son's smile. I have to. I can't let the truth die. Hayes's gaze was unreadable. Very well. We'll proceed with a formal inquiry. Until then, you will remain here, accessible for questioning. He turned to the agents at the door. Lock this room. The beam of his marker groaned and shut off, leaving them in sharp overhead light. Sarah's breath caught. Olivia's fingers hovered midair. Miller shifted in his seat, tension coiling in his shoulders. Hayes moved back behind the desk. Lieutenant, Detective, thank you for your candor. You've given us a foundation. We'll be in touch. Marcus rose, gripping the folder. Outside the door clicked shut. The hallway's emptiness stared back at them, glaring. They filed into the reception area without a word. In the parking lot, the humid air hit his face like a wave. Sarah exhaled sharply. They're going to call the commander? He has to testify, Marcus said, voice rough. It's the only way. Olivia slipped her laptop into her bag. Michael Anderson, will he even come forward again? Miller lit a cigarette at the car door. He will, if he wants immunity. He's afraid, but he'll talk if it protects him. Marcus slid into the driver's seat, heart pounding. The external challenge was clear, a formal investigation that could drag everyone through the mud. But his internal dilemma was sharper. He risked his career, his reputation, and now his family's safety. Every choice weighed on him. If he pressed forward, he might lose his son's trust. If he backed down, the injustice would stand. He started the engine. The car rolled forward onto the morning streets. As they drove, he glanced at Sarah in the passenger seat. She met his gaze. No fear, only resolve. He turned to Miller in the rearview mirror. Stay close, but watch your back. Miller nodded. Always. Marcus exhaled and straightened his shoulders. The road ahead was fraught, tangled with alliances and betrayals. But for his son, for the truth, he would navigate it all, even if Every step felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. And with that resolve, he steered them toward their next battle, knowing the real test of his character had only just begun. The morning, his voice echoed in the high-ceilinged chamber, steady but charged with emotion. He spoke of duty, of truth, of the burden of responsibility that weighed on every uniformed man and woman. He recounted the night of the incident as he remembered it, how Michael Anderson had slipped on the wet planks, how Marcus had moved instinctively to help, never to harm. He described the hidden memo naming Detective Miller the sole witness, how it had been buried, and the years of careful manipulation that followed. As he spoke, the light caught the sheen of sweat on Leon Richards's forehead and the stony resignation in Michael's downcast eyes. When Marcus finished, silence filled the space. Then Agent Hayes invited Detective Miller to testify. Miller rose, hands trembling slightly but voice resolute. He laid out the chronology: surveillance footage from the ladder beneath the boardwalk, the concealed camera that had captured the shove, his failed attempts to send the memo through proper channels, and his desperate choice to set a trap in the warehouse. Tears glistened in his eyes as he admitted how his methods had strayed from protocol, how he had risked everything to force the truth into the open. He apologized to Marcus, to Michael, to everyone wronged by his deception. Next, Michael Anderson took the stand. He drank water before speaking, voice small but unwavering. He described the fear that had seized him when he was paid to lie, the panic at being shoved into the water, the terror that Marcus had meant to hurt him. He confessed how his conscience gnawed at him every night, how he regretted drawing Marcus into a scandal he hadn't created. He spoke of his admiration for Marcus's bravery in the field, of the guilt that remained long after he'd escaped the river's cold grip. When he finished, he looked directly at Marcus, and Marcus saw in those eyes the remorse of a man who had narrowly chosen the wrong path and then chosen right. The prosecution stood briefly, attempting to undermine Marcus's credibility, pointing to the initial civilian report and the missing files. But Sarah Chun and Olivia Parker stood together at the defense table, speaking calmly and sharply about the visitor logs, the maintenance records, the phone pings that traced Leon's burner phone both to Marcus's home and to the dock. Olivia played the deli CCTV footage frame by frame, showing Leon Richards's gloved shove and then the angle Marcus's team had never seen. The jury watched in rapt silence as the tape unspooled their lie. Then Commander Daniel Hayes rose to testify. He spoke of his shock when he learned of the buried memo, of his regret at not noticing the system's corruption sooner. He described his long service with Marcus, how he had trusted him implicitly, and how devastated he was to see that trust manipulated. His voice wavered as he recounted a moment he realized the conspiracy reached into his own office. Someone had forged his initials on the security breach log, buried critical evidence, and nearly destroyed the reputation of a loyal soldier. As the final witness, Leon Richards was called. His bravado dissolved as he faced the jury. He admitted his part in the scheme, how he'd been paid to create the distraction, how greed had led him to risk Marcus's career for a few $1,000s. He spat out apologies, but his eyes betrayed a man who understood the gravity of his cowardice. He spoke of the recklessness in using a decorated SEAL's name as a pawn in his petty cons, and how Detective Miller's warehouse confrontation had forced his confession. When closing arguments began, the room felt charged as if a storm were gathering beyond its walls. Agent Hayes of Internal Affairs spoke with quiet authority. Protocols had been broken, lives damaged, but the truth had emerged. He urged the jury to consider not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of justice. The assistant prosecutor implored the jury to punish Marcus for his initial failure to immediately clear his name, but her words fell flat against the weight of the uncovered evidence. Then Marcus spoke. He did not beg for mercy, he asked only for fairness. He spoke of the fragility of trust, of how one lie, even a lie intended to protect, could shatter lives. He acknowledged his own failings, how his silence and acceptance of the initial story had allowed the deception to spread. Yet he reminded the court that accountability required more than finger-pointing, it needed courage. The courage to admit mistakes, to forgive transgressions, and to rebuild what had been broken. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the hush in the chamber felt heavy. Marcus sank into his seat, hands folded on his lap. Sarah's hand reached across the table and squeezed his. Olivia stood watchfully by, while Miller cleared his throat, gaze fixed on the door. Commander Hayes rested a steadying hand on Marcus's shoulder. For a moment, the soldier felt the weight of 1,000 shared battles in that single gesture. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, voice clear. We, the jury, find Lieutenant Marcus Thompson not guilty of excessive force. A ripple of relief washed through the room. Judge Avery pounded his gavel for order, then pronounced that all charges against Marcus were dismissed and that Leon Richards and Michael Anderson would be placed on probation with orders to perform community service and to pay restitution for their roles in the conspiracy. Detective John Miller, having cooperated fully and provided indispensable evidence, would face departmental review, but no criminal charges, his record to reflect both his breach and his redemption. Marcus exhaled, tension draining from his frame. He looked at Miller, who managed a tentative smile, eyes damp. Commander Hayes stepped forward, clasping Marcus's hand. "Welcome back," he said, voice thick. Marcus met his gaze, understanding that this welcome carried the burden of the trust they must rebuild. Outside the courthouse, the midday heat pressed down as they emerged onto the sunlit steps. Reporters craned cameras, but Marcus turned instead to the harbor, visible in the distance. He thought of the dawn they'd started this fight, of the sun waiting at home, of the promise he'd made to protect him from enemies seen and unseen. He felt in that moment the weight of every choice, the choice to expose the truth, the choice to confront betrayal, and the choice to seek a resolution that honored justice over convenience. Sarah caught his eye and offered a small, proud nod. Olivia slipped behind them, already tapping out a report. Miller fell into step beside Marcus, neither of them speaking for time. Finally, Miller spoke, voice low. "You okay, Marcus?" He glanced at Miller. "More than I've been in weeks." Miller offered a genuine smile. "Good." Commander Hayes stood in the doorway, watching them. Then he came forward and said, "Lieutenant, your work has set a new standard. It won't be easy to rebuild what was broken, but you've shown the way." Marcus nodded. "We'll do it." As they descended the courthouse steps, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. Justice had been served, but the path had been fraught with pain. In that pain, he found clarity, the realization that truth was not a single event, but a continuous commitment. He thought of the faces seated in that chamber, friends, foes, and uncertain allies, and knew they had all been changed by what had transpired. The harbor called to him then, beckoning with the promise of quiet and the familiar rhythm of waves. He walked toward it, Commander Hayes at his side, Sarah and Olivia close behind, and Miller bringing up the rear. Together, they made their way to the water's edge where the sunlight danced across the ripples. Marcus reached into his pocket and touched the worn photograph of his son. He closed his eyes, allowing the warmth of the morning and the peace of resolution to wash over him. In the gentle hush of the tide, he whispered a promise that he would tell his son of the truth, however messy, however painful, for it was only in honesty that they could both be free. And as the sun climbed higher, casting a golden path across the water, Marcus realized that sometimes the greatest battles were not fought on distant shores, but within the heart, and that victory belonged to those brave enough to face the light. Marcus stood by the harbor's edge long after the others had dispersed. The sun, now high in the sky, scattered silver axes of light across the water, each one shining with the promise of something new. Behind him, footsteps approached, Sarah Chun, Olivia Parker, and Detective John Miller, each carrying the quiet dignity of people who'd been tested and found, against expectation, stronger. Commander Daniel Hayes lingered on the steps above, his figure a silent sentinel to the dawn of a fresh chapter. Marcus drew in a deep breath of salt-tinged air, letting it fill his lungs and steady his heart. He felt the gentle pulse of the tide, as dependable as a heartbeat, and marveled at how something so constant could mirror the deepest lessons he'd learned. That in life, as in the sea, surfaces shift, undercurrents flow, but balance endures. He turned slowly, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "Thank you," he said softly, voice carrying over the lull of lapping waves, "for standing with me." Sarah gave a small, knowing smile. "You did the hard part, Marcus. You chose the truth." Olivia stepped forward, laptop tucked beneath her arm. "And you showed us that even the strongest system can break under secrecy. It takes courage to fix a broken structure." Miller cleared his throat, shifting his weight. "I'm sorry I betrayed your trust, but I'm glad we found our way back." Marcus nodded, acknowledging both apology and redemption. He glanced over at Leon Richards and Michael Anderson, who stood a few yards away, quietly talking under Hayes' watchful eye. The two men had been given a second chance, probation, community service, restitution, not because of leniency, but because justice at its core recognized the possibility of change. He closed his eyes for a moment and allowed the scene to sink in. The harbor, the courthouse steps behind them, the faces of those who had fought for integrity. He felt a current of gratitude swell within him, tempered by the gravity of their shared ordeal. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes opening to the shifting light, "about the kind of man I want my son to know." Sarah crossed her arms gently. "You'll be a good example." He managed a wry smile. "I hope so. But I've also been thinking about accountability, how easy it is to let discipline become blind obedience, and how important it is to remember that obedience without question can become tyranny." Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder. "You reminded us that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around." Miller nodded gravely. "And you reminded me that justice without compassion can be just as dangerous as compassion without justice." A hush fell over the group as the ripple of a small wave washed up the concrete platform. Marcus looked down at his boots, tracing the scuffs he'd earned on this journey, each one a testament to a choice made, a risk taken. He thought of the crumpled drawing that had started this spiral, of the burner phone that had led them here, of the warehouse confrontation that had cracked open the truth. He raised his gaze to the horizon, where sky met water in a seamless blue. "I came back from deployments many times," he said, voice soft, "but there's no mission more important than the one we live every day, being true to ourselves, to our loved ones, and to the principles we claim to uphold." Commander Hayes descended the steps, each stride measured. He joined them at the water's edge, hands clasped behind his back. "Lieutenant Thompson," he began, "you face not just an external threat, but the worst kind of enemy, the corruption of trust. You've shown leadership beyond rank." Marcus looked up at him. "I couldn't have done it alone." Hayes inclined his head. "Then let this be a lesson to all who serve, whether military or police, that truth is the foundation of any order. Without it, we're at the mercy of shadows." Sarah exhaled, eyes on the gentle swell of the sea. "What happens now?" Marcus turned to her, then to Olivia and Miller. "Now we rebuild. We'll review procedures, make sure evidence channels can't be suppressed. We'll hold each other accountable, daily, not just in crisis." Olivia smiled. "I'll draft the new protocol proposals. No more hidden memos." Miller chuckled softly. "And I'll lead the training on ethical whistleblowing, how to speak up safely, and how to listen without prejudice." Sarah shook her head with mock exasperation. "I'll be the enforcer." They all laughed, a light, genuine sound that felt like the closing of a long, dark chapter. In that laughter, Marcus heard the rebirth of camaraderie and conviction. He unzipped his coat and pulled out the worn photograph of his son. He unfolded it, smoothing out the creases. The boy's bright face looked back at him, innocence captured in lead and paper. Marcus felt something in his throat. Hope, most likely. He tucked the photograph gently into his inner pocket. "At home," he said, voice thickening, "I'll tell him everything. In a way he can understand, about standing up for what's right, about admitting when you're wrong, about forgiveness." Hayes laid a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "He'll grow up knowing his father is a man of integrity." Marcus met his friend's eyes, a silent promise passing between them. They had faced betrayal, deception, and moral compromise, not in a war zone, but within the walls meant to protect them. Yet through adversity, they'd forged a stronger code, one tempered by empathy and sharpened by truth. The tide shifted again, carrying a cluster of seaweed in its gentle surge. Marcus stepped closer to the edge, his boots anchoring him to the place where land meets sea. He folded his hands behind his back and gazed out, reflecting on how every choice has consequences and how courage often meant risking everything for a principle. He felt light rain begin to fall, tiny droplets that made the concrete glisten. The clouds overhead were thin, streaked with silver, as though the sky itself shared in his quietly profound moment. He listened to the hush of the water, the distant call of a gull, and in that ordinary symphony, he found a sense of renewal. "Shall we?" he asked, turning back to the group. "We've pledged to rebuild. Let's get to work." They fell into step behind him, each moving with purpose. As they walked away from the water, Marcus glanced once more at the horizon, then let it fade behind him. The moral clarity he'd fought so hard to expose now illuminated the path forward, a path not unmarked by challenge, but assured by integrity. In the days and months that followed, the reforms they enacted rippled through their organizations. Transparency protocols, strengthened oversight, safe channels for whistleblowers, and mandatory ethics training. Marcus became a vocal advocate for accountability, speaking at conferences, mentoring young officers, and writing articles on the delicate balance between authority and conscience. Sarah, Olivia, and Miller each took leading roles in their fields, their shared ordeal forging lifelong trust. Commander Hayes rose to a new post, carrying the lessons of this trial into broader leadership. And at home, Marcus told his son a story, one of a father who faced shadows and stepped into light, of mistakes acknowledged and trust restored. The boy's eyes widened at the details, then softened with understanding beyond his years. He threw his arms around Marcus's legs and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Dad." In that embrace, Marcus felt the weight of every decision lighten, replaced by the steady knowledge that truth, once found, carried its own redemption. And as father and son stood together, the world felt vast, but no longer overwhelming because they had each other, and they had learned that in every heart lies the power to choose integrity even when the price is steep. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.